Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. Homecoming Shadows. Staff Sergeant Daniel Burns pulled into the driveway of his modest two-story house in Riverside, California, the desert dust of Afghanistan still clinging to his memories. 15 months of deployment had aged him beyond his 32 years, but the thought of seeing his daughter Emma had sustained him through the darkest moments overseas. His wife Marla had been distant in their video calls lately, but he attributed it to the strain of single parenting. Daniel's background in Army intelligence had taught him to read situations quickly, and something felt wrong the moment he stepped out of his pickup truck. The lawn was overgrown, newspapers cluttered the porch, and Emma's bicycle, her most prized possession, lay rusted and forgotten in the weeds. He knocked on his own front door, a habit from military protocol, but received no answer. Using his key, he entered to find the house in disarray. Beer bottles littered the coffee table, and the smell of cigarettes, something Marla never tolerated, hung heavy in the air. "Marla? Emma?" His voice echoed through the empty rooms. A muffled whimpering from the backyard caught his attention. Following the sound, Daniel's blood turned to ice. Behind the garage, a large dog Kennel sat in the shade, and inside, curled in a filthy blanket, was his 7-year-old daughter. Emma was skeletal, her once bright blonde hair matted and dirty. Mosquito bites covered her exposed arms and legs, and a metal bowl with remnants of what looked like dog food sat beside her. "Daddy." Emma's voice was barely a whisper as she looked up with hollow eyes that had seen too much. Daniel's hands shook as he unlocked the kennel. "I'm here, baby. Daddy's here." As he lifted his daughter, shocked by how light she'd become, Emma buried her face in his shoulder. "Mom's boyfriend Wayne said this is where bad girls belong. He made me eat from the bowl when I cried for you." The rage that filled Daniel was different from anything he'd experienced in combat. This was personal. This was his child. But his training kicked in. Secure the victim first, gather intelligence second, eliminate the threat third. "Where's Mommy?" he asked gently as he carried Emma inside. "She went to the store with Wayne. They said they'd be back tonight." Emma's words were slurred with exhaustion and dehydration. Daniel immediately called his old friend Miguel Alexander, a Navy corpsman who now worked at the base medical facility. Within 20 minutes, Miguel arrived with a portable medical kit. "Jesus Christ, Danny," Miguel whispered as he examined Emma. "This is severe neglect, maybe worse. She's dehydrated, malnourished, and these marks." He pointed to fading bruises on Emma's arms. "Someone's been restraining her." As Miguel tended to Emma, Daniel stepped outside and made a call to his former commanding officer, Colonel Eleanor Burnett, who now worked in Criminal Investigation Division. "Danny, what's your situation?" "I need a favor, Colonel. And I need it off the books until I can figure out what we're dealing with." After explaining the situation, Burnett's voice hardened. "I'll have a social worker and detective I trust meet you at the base medical facility. Don't do anything stupid, Burns. Let the system work." But Daniel had already made his decision. The system had failed Emma once. He wouldn't let it happen again. That evening, as Emma slept peacefully in the base hospital, Daniel sat in his truck outside his house, waiting. At 11:47 p.m., a beat-up Camaro pulled into the driveway. Wayne Finley stumbled out first, a tall, thin man with greasy hair and prison tattoos covering his arms. Marla followed, clearly intoxicated. Daniel watched through his night vision scope as Wayne fumbled with the front door key, his movements erratic. This was the man who had tortured his daughter. This was the man who would pay. But not tonight. Tonight was for gathering intelligence. Chapter 2. The Enemy Revealed. Daniel spent the next 3 days conducting surveillance on Wayne Finley while Emma recovered under medical care. His intelligence training had taught him that knowing your enemy was the key to victory, and Wayne was proving to be a goldmine of criminal activity. Through careful observation and some discreet inquiries with his contacts at the local police department, Daniel learned that Wayne Finley was a 34-year-old repeat offender with a record spanning back to his juvenile years. 3 counts of domestic violence, 2 drug possession charges, and a disturbing pattern of targeting single mothers with young children. Detective Adrian Dodd, an old friend from high school who now works sex crimes, met Daniel at a coffee shop downtown. "I can't officially tell you this," Adrian said, sliding a folder across the table, "but Wayne Finley has been on our radar for months. We suspect he's part of a larger network, men who specifically target military wives while their husbands are deployed." Daniel opened the folder to find surveillance photos of Wayne with 3 different women, all of whom had young children. "How many families?" "At least 6 that we can confirm. The pattern is always the same. They meet these women at support group meetings for military spouses, gain their trust, then gradually isolate them from friends and family. The psychological manipulation is textbook predator behavior." "And the children?" Adrienne's jaw tightened. "That's where it gets worse. We have reports from Child Protective Services, but these guys are smart. They move the children between different houses, keep them out of sight during welfare checks. By the time someone reports it, they've vanished." Daniel studied the photos more carefully. One showed Wayne with a woman named Tammy Courtney and her 2 young sons. Another showed him with Paulette Hubbard and her daughter. "Where are these other kids now?" "That's what we're trying to figure out." Tammy Courtney filed a missing persons report on her children 3 months ago. She claims Wayne took them after she tried to leave him, but she's too terrified to cooperate with our investigation. The scope of Wayne's operation was becoming clear, and Daniel realized Emma's situation wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic targeting of military families. That afternoon, Daniel visited Emma at the hospital. She was physically recovering but remained withdrawn, flinching whenever a male doctor entered the room. "Daddy, are you going to leave again?" Emma asked as Daniel read her story. "No, sweetheart. Daddy's never leaving you again. Wayne said you didn't want me anymore. He said that why you went away." Daniel felt his heart break and rage simultaneously. "Emma, look at me. Daddy went away to keep you safe, and I thought about you every single day. Wayne lied to you. None of what happened was your fault." Dr. Naomi Blake, the child psychologist assigned to Emma's case, pulled Daniel aside after visiting hours. "Your daughter is showing classic signs of psychological abuse and trauma," Dr. Blake explained. "The isolation, the degradation, the systematic breaking down of her self-worth. These are techniques used by sophisticated abusers. This wasn't random cruelty, it was calculated." "What do you mean?" "Whoever did this to Emma has experience. They knew exactly how to break down a child's resistance without leaving obvious physical evidence. I'm seeing patterns consistent with organized abuse networks." That night, Daniel sat in his truck outside a bar called the Rusty Anchor, where Wayne was drinking with 2 other men. Through directional microphones, equipment he'd acquired through his military contacts, Daniel listened to their conversation. "The Burns kid was getting too mouthy," Wayne was saying. "Had to teach her some respect before Daddy came home." One of the other men, who Daniel later identified as Kenny Crawford, laughed. "How many you got stashed now?" 4 in rotation. Military brats are easy money. Their moms are desperate for attention, and the dads are always gone. Perfect setup. The third man, Rich Walls, leaned forward. "What about Burns? Word is he's some kind of special forces hotshot." Wayne's smile turned cruel. "Army intelligence. Thinks he's smart, but he's got no idea what he's walking into. Besides, I've got insurance." "What kind of insurance?" "Let's just say if Burns gets too curious, his precious daughter might have an accident. Kids that traumatized are suicide risks, you know? Real tragic." Daniel's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm, but he forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't just about Wayne anymore. It was about an entire network of predators who had been targeting military families with impunity. As the night wore on, Daniel learned that the 3 men operated what they called rotation houses, different locations where they kept children while cycling through their targets. They had contacts in social services who helped cover their tracks, and even some corrupt military personnel who provided deployment schedules. By dawn, Daniel had recorded enough evidence to bring down the entire operation. But he also knew that going through official channels would take months, during which time other children would suffer. These men had threatened Emma's life, and they were actively abusing other children. It was time to take direct action. Chapter 3: The Gathering Storm. Daniel spent the next week methodically planning his approach, while maintaining the appearance of a grieving father focused solely on his daughter's recovery. He visited Emma daily, attended therapy sessions, and played the role of a man seeking justice through proper channels. But in reality, he was assembling a team. Miguel Alexander was his first recruit. The former Navy corpsman had seen the state Emma was in and needed no convincing. "These bastards are preying on our families while we're overseas protecting their freedom," Miguel said grimly. "What do you need?" "Medical expertise and someone I can trust to watch my back." The second team member was Sergeant Major Damon Freeman, Daniel's former squad leader, who had recently returned from his own deployment to find his ex-wife had disappeared with their son. When Damon learned about the network targeting military families, his expression turned lethal. "I've been looking for my boy for 6 months," Damon said. "You're telling me this Wayne character might know where he is?" "It's possible. We know they're moving kids between houses. Your son could be part of their operation." The third member was unexpected, Tammy Courtney, the woman whose children Wayne had taken. Daniel tracked her down to a women's shelter, where she was living under an assumed name. "He said if I talked to police, he'd kill my boys," Tammy whispered, her hands shaking as she described Wayne's threats. "But I know where one of the houses is. I followed him once before he caught me." Tammy led them to a rundown farmhouse 20 miles outside town. Using military-grade surveillance equipment, they confirmed the presence of at least 3 children inside, guarded by Rich Walls and another man they identified as Gerald Sweeney. "We can't just storm in," Daniel explained to his team during their planning session. "These men have no conscience. They'll hurt the kids if they feel cornered. We need to be surgical." Detective Adrian Dodd, while officially unable to participate, provided crucial intelligence about police response times and the locations of other suspected properties. "I can't give you official backup," she said, "but I can guarantee that certain areas will be lightly patrolled during specific time windows." Daniel's plan was multifaceted. First, they would systematically gather evidence of the entire network's operation. Not just Wayne, but everyone involved, including their contacts in social services and any corrupt officials. Second, they would simultaneously rescue all the children in coordinated operations. Third, they would ensure that every perpetrator faced consequences that matched their crimes. "This isn't about revenge," Daniel told his team. "This is about justice and protection. These men have proven they'll hurt children to protect themselves. We can't let that happen." The team spent days conducting surveillance, mapping out the network's operations. They discovered 4 different properties where children were being held, a complex rotation system, and a hierarchy that extended beyond Wayne, Kenny, and Rich. At the top was a man named Owen Branch, a former military contractor who had been dishonorably discharged for selling weapons to insurgents. Branch had been quietly building his network for years, specifically targeting military families because he knew their vulnerabilities. "Branch is the key," Daniel explained. "He's the one coordinating everything. Take him down, and the whole network collapses." But Branch was also the most dangerous. Intelligence reports suggested he had contacts in organized crime and access to weapons that went far beyond what street-level criminals typically possessed. As they prepared for their operation, Daniel received a call that changed everything. "Daddy." Emma's voice was terrified. "Wayne is here at the hospital. He says you have something that belongs to him, and if you don't give it back, he's going to take me away again." Daniel was already running toward his truck as he spoke. "Emma, listen to me carefully. Find Dr. Blake or one of the nurses you trust and stay with them. Don't go anywhere with anyone else. Daddy's coming." When Daniel arrived at the hospital, Wayne was gone, but the message was clear. The network knew about his investigation, and they were escalating. That night, Daniel found a note taped to his front door. "You have 48 hours to stop digging, or your daughter disappears permanently. This time, you'll never find her." The threat confirmed what Daniel had suspected. They were dealing with professionals who had resources and connections beyond typical street criminals. But it also meant they were scared enough to make threats, which suggested his investigation was damaging their operation. "They just made this personal," Damon said when Daniel showed him the note. "It was always personal," Daniel replied. "Now it's war." The team accelerated their timeline. In 48 hours, They would execute simultaneous operations against all 4 properties, gathering evidence while rescuing the children. But first, they needed to ensure Emma's safety. Daniel made arrangements for Emma to be transferred to a secure military medical facility under the protection of Colonel Burnett's security team. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he told Emma as they prepared for the transfer. "Daddy has to go away for a little while to make sure the bad men can never hurt you again." Emma looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Are you going to hurt them like they hurt me?" Daniel knelt down to her level. "I'm going to make sure they can never hurt any child ever again. That's a promise." As Emma was safely transferred, Daniel and his team prepared for the most important mission of their lives. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were fathers, protectors, and the only thing standing between innocent children and monsters who wore human faces. The war for Emma's justice was about to begin. Chapter 4: Intelligence Gathering. Daniel's military intelligence background proved invaluable as the team began their systematic dismantling of Owen Branch's network. Using a combination of electronic surveillance, physical observation, and psychological profiling, they mapped out the entire operation with precision that would have impressed his former CIA liaisons. The breakthrough came when Miguel, posing as a down-on-his-luck veteran, infiltrated one of the bars where the network recruited desperate military spouses. Within days, he had made contact with Derek Lewis, a low-level operator who handled the financial side of the operation. "They're not just trafficking kids," Miguel reported back. "They're running a whole ecosystem. They've got fake social workers, corrupt court officials, even a judge who's on a payroll. Judge Nelson Fernandez has been rubber-stamping custody transfers for years." The scope of corruption was staggering. Branch's network had tentacles reaching into every level of the system designed to protect children. They had been operating with near impunity because they controlled the very people who should have stopped them. Damon's contribution came through his contacts in military logistics. "I found where they're getting their intel on deployment schedules," he announced during one of their evening briefings. "There's a clerk at Personnel Command, Joey Washington, who's been selling information about families whose breadwinners are overseas." Daniel studied the organizational chart they had constructed. So Branch identifies targets through Washington's intelligence. His people make contact through support groups. They use Lewis to manage the financial aspects, and Fernandez provides legal cover when they need to move children through the system. "It's brilliant and sick at the same time," Tammy added. She had proven surprisingly valuable as an intelligence asset, her intimate knowledge of Wayne's habits and the network's operations filling in crucial gaps. But their most valuable intelligence came from an unexpected source: Dr. Blake, the child psychologist treating Emma. "I've been treating children with trauma patterns consistent with your daughter's case for the past 2 years," Dr. Blake revealed during a private meeting with Daniel. "I started keeping detailed records because something felt wrong about the number of military children showing up with similar psychological profiles." Dr. Blake's records painted a horrifying picture. Over 24 children had passed through her care with trauma signatures that matched systematic abuse. Most have been returned to homes where their conditions mysteriously improved just enough to avoid triggering mandatory reporting requirements. "They're sophisticated," Dr. Blake explained. "They know exactly how far they can push before triggering intervention protocols. These children are being psychologically conditioned to be compliant and silent." The revelation that there were potentially dozens of victims, not just the few they had identified, changed the scope of their mission. This wasn't just about rescuing a handful of children. It was about exposing a systematic exploitation network that had been operating for years. Daniel's investigation into Wayne's background revealed the recruitment and training methods Branch used. Wayne had been recruited from prison by Branch's organization with the promise of easy money and protection. They had trained him in psychological manipulation techniques specifically designed to control both mothers and children. "Look at this." Daniel showed his team a series of documents they had acquired through careful surveillance of Wayne's apartment. They have actual training manuals, techniques for identifying vulnerable military spouses, methods for isolating them from support networks, and step-by-step instructions for breaking down children's resistance. The manuals read like psychological warfare textbooks, complete with case studies and success metrics. Branch's organization wasn't just criminal. It was professional, systematic, and constantly evolving their methods. The team's surveillance of the 4 properties revealed a rotation schedule that moved children every 2 weeks to prevent them from becoming attached to any location or forming relationships with specific guards. The psychological impact was deliberate. Constant displacement prevented the children from feeling secure enough to resist or seek help. At the farmhouse Tammy had identified, they observed Rich Walls and Gerald Sweeney maintaining what appeared to be a small dormitory for 6 children aged between 5 and 12. The children were kept on strict schedules, meals at specific times, limited bathroom breaks, and constant supervision. "They're treating these kids like livestock," Damon said grimly after reviewing surveillance footage. "Breaking their spirits so they won't cause problems." The second property, a suburban house managed by Kenny Crawford, housed older children who appeared to be involved in various forms of labor, cleaning, yard work, and other domestic tasks that generated income for their captors. The third location was the most disturbing, a warehouse where children were held during punishment periods or when they were being transferred between long-term locations. The conditions were deliberately harsh, designed to make the regular housing seem preferable by comparison. The fourth property, Branch's personal compound, was where the operations headquarters were located. This was where decisions were made, where new victims were processed, and where the financial aspects of the network were managed. "Branch keeps the most valuable assets close," Daniel observed. "Children of high-ranking military personnel, kids whose parents have significant resources. Those are his insurance policies." As they gathered intelligence, the team also learned about the network's security measures. Branch employed former military and ex-law enforcement personnel as security, men who had been dishonorably discharged or forced out of their positions due to misconduct. "We're not dealing with street thugs," Daniel warned his team. "These guys have training and experience. They know how to handle weapons, how to set up perimeters, and how to respond to threats." But Daniel's team had advantages that Branch's security didn't expect. They were still active or recently active military with clearance levels that gave them access to equipment and intelligence resources that criminals couldn't obtain. Through his contacts at the base, Daniel acquired night vision equipment, encrypted communication systems, and detailed floor plans of all 4 properties obtained through routine building inspections conducted by cooperative officials. Miguel's medical background proved crucial when they discovered that many of the children were being kept sedated with prescription medications obtained through corrupt medical personnel. "They're using a cocktail of anti-anxiety medications and mild sedatives," Miguel explained. "Enough to keep the kids compliant, but not enough to cause obvious impairment that would trigger medical intervention." The team spent 2 weeks gathering intelligence, building detailed operational plans for each property, and identifying every member of the network from top to bottom. They knew who, what, where, and when. Now, they needed to determine how to bring justice without putting innocent children at risk. "We have enough evidence to bring down the entire network," Daniel told his team during their final planning session. "But evidence doesn't help the kids who are suffering right now. We need to act." The plan they developed was ambitious and dangerous. They would simultaneously hit all 4 properties, rescue every child, and gather enough evidence to ensure that every member of the network faced consequences. But success would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and a level of coordination that would test even their military training. "Remember," Daniel said as they prepared for the operation, "our primary mission is the children. Everything else is secondary. We get them out safely, then we worry about justice." But as they prepared to launch their operation, Wayne made one final, fatal mistake. He tried to get to Emma at the secure medical facility. Chapter 5. The Network Strikes Back. The attack on the secure medical facility came at 0300 hours, coordinated and professional. Wayne Finley wasn't alone. He had brought 4 men, all armed and moving with military precision. But they hadn't counted on Daniel's paranoia or Colonel Burnett's security protocols. Daniel was already awake, monitoring security feeds from his position in the facility's observation room, when motion sensors detected the approaching vehicles. He watched Wayne's team disable exterior cameras with practiced efficiency, except for the hidden military-grade surveillance systems they didn't know existed. Teams moving on the medical facility, Daniel reported through encrypted radio to his scattered teammates. 4 hostiles, possibly 5. They're coming for Emma. The facility's security team, all former Special Forces personnel handpicked by Colonel Burnett, had been expecting this possibility. They had spent days planning defensive positions and evacuation routes specifically designed to protect the children and medical staff inside. Wayne's team made their first mistake by underestimating the facility's defensive capabilities. They approached expecting hospital security guards and instead encountered former Rangers who had fought in 3 different theaters of operation. The firefight was brief but decisive. Wayne's men found themselves trapped in a kill zone, caught between prepared defensive positions and Daniel's team, who had arrived as backup within minutes of the initial alert. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Wayne's men were dead. 1 was critically wounded, and Kenny Crawford had been captured alive. Wayne himself had tried to flee, but found Damon Freeman waiting by his escape vehicle. "You made a mistake coming here," Damon said as he zip-tied Wayne's hands behind his back. "Now we know exactly how desperate you are." But the attack had revealed something crucial. The network was more organized and better equipped than they had realized. The weapons Wayne's team carried were military-grade, and their tactical movements suggested professional training. This wasn't a desperate grab, Daniel observed as they examined the capture equipment. This was a military operation. Someone with serious resources equipped and trained these guys. Detective Adrian Dodd arrived at the scene to process the evidence, but her expression was grim. "I've got bad news, Danny. Judge Fernandez issued an emergency custody order 3 hours ago, claiming Emma was in danger and needed to be removed to protective custody. The paperwork looks legitimate." "Let me guess," Daniel said. "The protective custody facility is one of Branch's properties." It gets worse. The order was requested by a social worker named Sylvia Steele, who, according to our records, has been dead for 6 months. Someone's using her credentials. The network's response to their investigation was escalating rapidly. They were no longer trying to hide their activities. They were actively attacking anyone who threatened their operation. Kenny Crawford, wounded but conscious, provided crucial intelligence under interrogation. "Branch knows about your team," he revealed. "He's got contacts in military intelligence who've been feeding him information about your investigation." The revelation that their operation had been compromised from within the military command structure changed everything. Someone with access to classified information had been keeping Branch informed of their activities. "Who's the leak?" Daniel demanded. Kenny's smile was bloody but defiant. "Someone close enough to know your real mission. Branch says you military types are all the same. You think you're heroes, but you're just pawns like everyone else." Colonel Burnett arrived at the facility within the hour, her expression dark with fury. "We've got a problem, Burns. Someone accessed your file through official channels 6 hours ago. They know your psychological profile, your military record, and your current operational status." "Who had access?" 3 people. Your former commanding officer in Afghanistan, the base psychiatrist who cleared you for active duty, and Burnett's voice trailed off. "And your wife's assigned military family liaison officer." The family liaison officer was supposed to provide support and assistance to military spouses during deployments. If that person was working with Branch's network, they would have had access to hundreds of vulnerable families. "Give me a name," Daniel said. "Captain Brent Michael. He's been the liaison officer for this base for 3 years." Daniel felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Captain Michael would have known about his deployment schedule, his family situation, and his expected return date. He would have been in a perfect position to identify Marla as a target and facilitate Wayne's introduction into their lives. It's not just about the kids, Daniel realized. They're targeting specific military families for a reason. They want intelligence, access, or leverage over active military personnel. Miguel's voice was ice cold as he processed this information. They turned Emma into a tool to control you. If you had found out about their operation while you were overseas, they could have threatened her safety to keep you silent. The scope of the network's operation was becoming clear. They weren't just trafficking children for money. They were building a systematic way to compromise and control military personnel through threats to their families. But Branch had made a critical error by attacking the medical facility. In trying to reclaim control of the situation, he had revealed the full extent of his resources and connections. More importantly, he had given Daniel's team legal justification for everything that came next. They just escalated this from child abuse to terrorism, Colonel Burnett observed. Attacking a military medical facility, threatening the safety of military dependents, compromising military intelligence. This is now a matter of national security. That designation changed the rules of engagement completely. Daniel's team was no longer operating as concerned parents seeking justice. They were now officially sanctioned to neutralize a threat to military operations and personnel. "I need authorization for enhanced interrogation of the captured suspects," Daniel requested. "You have it. I also have authorization to provide you with any resources you need to eliminate this threat permanently." As his team prepared for their expanded mission, Daniel visited Emma one final time before the operation began. She was safe in a secure bunker facility, but the attack had terrified her. "Daddy, are the bad men coming back?" "No, sweetheart. Daddy and his friends are going to make sure they can never hurt anyone ever again." Emma looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much, but still held trust in her father's ability to protect her. "Will you come back?" "I promise, Emma. This time, when I come back, you'll never have to be afraid again." That night, Daniel's team launched their coordinated assault on all 4 of Branch's properties simultaneously. But this was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a systematic dismantling of a network that had been compromising military families and personnel for years. The war for Emma's justice had become a war for the safety of every military family, and Daniel Burns intended to win it decisively. Chapter 6: The Trap Springs. The simultaneous assault on Branch's 4 properties began at 0200 hours under the cover of a new moon. Daniel's team had grown from 3 to 12, reinforced by hand-picked operators from Colonel Burnett's Special Operations Unit. Each target would be hit by a 3-person team with specific objectives: rescue the children, gather evidence, and capture high-value targets alive for interrogation. Daniel led the assault on Branch's compound personally. This was the nerve center of the operation, where the most dangerous criminals will be located along with the evidence needed to bring down the entire network. Using thermal imaging, they confirmed 8 adult heat signatures and at least 6 children inside the main building. Branch's security was professional but predictable. Former military personnel, following standard defensive protocols that Daniel had been trained to counter. Team 2, report, Daniel whispered into his comm unit as his team prepared to breach the compound's perimeter. "Farmhouse secured," came Damon's voice. 4 children recovered, 3 suspects in custody. Rich Walls attempted to use one of the kids as a human shield. "He's no longer a concern." Team 3. Miguel's voice was grimly satisfied. "Warehouse facility cleared. 2 children recovered. Facility appears to be used for intake and processing." Gerald Sweeney was found destroying financial records. "We stopped him." Team 4. The 4th team, led by one of Burnett's operators, had targeted the suburban house where older children were held. 5 children secured, house cleared. Found extensive video equipment and computer systems. Looks like they were documenting their activities. Daniel felt a surge of satisfaction. The coordination was working perfectly, but the compound remained the primary objective. This was where Branch would make his stand and where the most crucial evidence would be located. Moving on primary target, Daniel reported as his team approached the compound's main building. The breach was textbook perfect. Flashbang grenades disabled the guards' night vision while Daniel's team moved through pre-planned entry points. Their night vision equipment and superior training gave them an overwhelming advantage over Branch's security forces. But Branch himself proved to be more formidable than expected. When Daniel reached the compound's command center, he found Branch calmly destroying computer drives while holding a pistol to the head of a young boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. "Staff Sergeant Burns," Branch said without looking up from his work. "Right on time." I was wondering when you'd finally make it to the main event. Daniel kept his rifle trained on Branch while calculating angles and distances. The shot was possible, but risky with the child so close. Let the boy go, Branch. This is between you and me. No, Sergeant. This is between me and the system that created me. Branch's voice was calm, almost conversational. Did you know I was military intelligence too? 15 years of faithful service before they threw me away over some weapons that went missing in Iraq. You chose to become a criminal. No one forced you to hurt children. Branch's laugh was bitter. Hurt children? I gave these kids structure, discipline, purpose. Most of them come from broken homes where their parents don't want them. I provided order in their chaotic lives by locking them in cages and forcing them to eat dog food, by teaching them that actions have consequences, that respect must be earned, that the strong survive and the weak serve. Branch finally looked up from his destructive work. Military principles, Sergeant, the same ones that made you what you are. Daniel recognized the psychological manipulation. Branch was trying to create moral equivalence between his criminal activities and legitimate military training. It was a technique used by terrorists and war criminals to justify their actions. You're wrong, Daniel said. Military discipline is about protecting the innocent and serving something greater than yourself. What you've done is the exact opposite. Really? Then tell me, Sergeant, what are you going to do to me right now? You've come here with superior firepower. You've killed my security team, and you're planning to eliminate me regardless of what evidence you find. How is that different from what I've done? The question was designed to create hesitation, to make Daniel doubt the righteousness of his mission. But Daniel had spent 15 months overseas seeing what real evil looked like, and he recognized it clearly. The difference, Daniel said, is that when this is over, these children go home to people who love them. They get therapy, education, and the chance to heal and grow. Your version of order was about breaking them permanently. Branch's expression changed, his facade of calm superiority cracking. You sanctimonious bastard. You think you're saving them? You have no idea what you've destroyed. This network provided services that people wanted. Those parents sold their children to us willingly. Some of them were coerced, manipulated, or threatened. And none of that justifies what you did to the children. The standoff continued for several tense seconds before Daniel made his decision. Using a technique learned from his sniper training, he created a micro-distraction by dropping a spare magazine, causing Branch to shift his attention for a fraction of a second. That fraction was all Daniel needed. His shot was precise and instantly fatal, dropping Branch without giving him time to harm the child he was holding. As Daniel secured the scene and comforted the terrified boy, his comm unit crackled with reports from the other teams. The operation had been a complete success. 17 children rescued, the entire leadership structure captured or eliminated, and enough evidence seized to prosecute everyone involved in the network. But the most significant discovery came from the computer systems they had secured before Branch could destroy them. The files revealed the true scope of the network's activities and the identity of every person who had collaborated with them. Daniel, you need to see this. Miguel's voice was shaken as he reported from the warehouse facility. We found detailed files on over 200 military families. Deployment schedules, psychological profiles, financial records, everything they would need to target vulnerable spouses and children. The evidence painted a picture of systematic targeting that went back nearly 5 years. Branch's network had been identifying military families with specific vulnerabilities and then exploiting them through a combination of psychological manipulation, financial pressure, and direct threats. Most shocking was the discovery that Captain Brent Michael, the military family liaison officer, had been providing detailed intelligence about military families for years. His position gave him access to confidential information about deployment schedules, family problems, financial difficulties, and psychological evaluations. He was the key to the whole operation, Detective Adrian Dodd observed as she reviewed the seized files. Without his intelligence, they never could have targeted families so precisely. The files also revealed the fate of Damon's missing son. The boy had been moved to a facility in Nevada part of a larger network that extended across multiple states. Within hours, FBI agents were en route to that location with rescue operations planned for the following day. As dawn broke over the compound, Daniel stood among the evidence of Branch's defeated network and felt something he hadn't experienced since returning from Afghanistan: genuine peace. Emma was safe, other children had been rescued, and the people responsible for their suffering had faced justice. But the most important moment came when Emma was finally brought to the scene under heavy security. Daniel knelt down as she ran toward him, catching her in his arms as she threw herself against his chest. "It's over, sweetheart," he whispered as she cried into his shoulder. "The bad men can never hurt you again." "Are you sure, Daddy?" Daniel looked around at the defeated compound, the captured criminals, and the evidence that would ensure justice for every victim. "I'm sure, Emma. You're safe now." For the first time since returning from deployment, Daniel Burns felt like he had truly completed his mission. The enemy had been defeated, the innocent had been protected, and his daughter was finally, truly safe. Chapter 7. Unraveling the Web. The interrogation of captured network members revealed the true scope of Branch's organization and the complicity of officials throughout the system. Captain Brent Michael, faced with overwhelming evidence of his collaboration, broke within hours and provided detailed information about the network's operations and contacts. It started small, Michael confessed during his interrogation. "Branch approached me 3 years ago, said he needed help identifying families that might need additional support during deployments. He offered money, and I was going through a divorce, facing bankruptcy." Daniel watched the interrogation through one-way glass, feeling disgust at the man who had helped target his family. "How many families did you identify for him?" "Maybe 50 over 3 years. But I swear I didn't know what he was really doing. I thought he was running some kind of support group network." "But you never checked on the families you referred? Never wondered why children were disappearing or why mothers stopped coming to support meetings?" Michael's silence was answer enough. He had willfully ignored the signs because the money was too good and the truth was too terrible to acknowledge. The documents seized from Branch's compound painted a picture of systematic corruption that reached into multiple state agencies. Judge Nelson Fernandez had been taking bribes to rubber-stamp custody modifications and emergency placements. Social worker Sylvia Steele had been murdered when she threatened to expose the network, and her credentials had been used posthumously to process fraudulent cases. But the most disturbing revelation came from financial records that showed the network had been selling information about military families to foreign intelligence services. Branch's operation wasn't just about exploiting children. It was about compromising military personnel for espionage purposes. They were building detailed psychological profiles of military families, Colonel Burnett explained during a classified briefing. The child abuse was terrible, but it was also cover for a broader intelligence operation targeting our personnel. Daniel studied the evidence with growing anger. So Emma wasn't just a victim of abuse. She was being used as leverage to potentially compromise me if they needed intelligence. The pattern suggests that's exactly what they were doing. They would target families of military intelligence personnel, special forces operators, and anyone with access to classified information. The children became hostages to ensure cooperation if they needed it. The scope of the network's activities became clear as more evidence was processed. They had infiltrated military family support systems, corrupted officials responsible for child welfare, and created a pipeline for compromising military personnel that could have had devastating national security implications. Dr. Naomi Blake's psychological evaluation of the rescued children revealed the systematic nature of the abuse. These children weren't just randomly mistreated, she reported. They were subjected to specific psychological conditioning designed to break their will and make them compliant. It's consistent with techniques used to create assets for intelligence operations. The children rescued from Branch's network ranged in age from 5 to 16, and all showed signs of systematic psychological conditioning. The older children had been trained to monitor and report on their parents' activities, while the younger ones had been conditioned to be completely submissive to authority figures. They were creating a generation of compromised assets, Dr. Blake explained. Children who could be used to monitor their parents, gather intelligence, or serve as leverage for future operations. The investigation expanded as FBI agents followed leads to other states and discovered that Branch's network was connected to similar operations across the country. What had started as an investigation into Emma's abuse had uncovered a national security threat of unprecedented scope. Damon Freeman's son was successfully rescued from the Nevada facility, along with 12 other children. The boy had been systematically conditioned to believe his father had abandoned him and that his new family was the only one that cared about him. It's going to take months of therapy to undo the psychological damage, Dr. Blake warned. These children have been taught to distrust their real families and to see their abusers as protectors. But there was also hope. The evidence gathered from Branch's network had provided law enforcement with the tools to prosecute not just the direct perpetrators, but everyone who had facilitated their operations. Judge Fernandez was arrested on corruption charges, and the investigation had revealed corruption in Child Protective Services offices across 3 states. We're looking at the largest child trafficking and corruption case in FBI history, Detective Adrian Dodd reported. But thanks to your team's work, we have enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved. The final piece of the puzzle came when forensic accountants traced the network's financing back to its original source. Branch's operation had been funded by a combination of human trafficking profits, intelligence sales to foreign governments, and corruption of government contracts. Branch was working with defense contractors who were overcharging the military for services and equipment, the forensic team reported. The extra money was being funneled into his network, which provided intelligence about military families and personnel in return. The revelation that defense contractors had been complicit in the network's operations triggered additional investigations and prosecutions. Companies that had been trusted with military contracts had been actively working to compromise military personnel and their families. As the full scope of the network's activities became public, Daniel found himself testifying before congressional committees and military oversight boards. The scandal triggered reforms in military family support systems, background checks for personnel with access to family information, and new protocol for monitoring the welfare of military dependents. But for Daniel, the most important outcome was Emma's recovery. With intensive therapy and the knowledge that her abusers could never hurt her again, she slowly began to heal from her trauma. She's remarkably resilient, Dr. Blake observed during one of Emma's therapy sessions. The fact that she maintained trust in you throughout her ordeal suggests that Branch's conditioning techniques weren't completely successful. Emma's recovery became a symbol of hope for all the children rescued from the network. Despite the systematic abuse they had endured, most of them retained the capacity to heal and rebuild their lives with proper support and care. The investigation also led to policy changes that would protect military families in the future. New oversight protocols, background checks, and monitoring systems were implemented to prevent similar networks from targeting military personnel and their families. As Daniel watched Emma playing with other children during a therapy session, he reflected on the journey from that terrible day when he found her locked in a kennel to this moment when she was learning to trust and laugh again. The network that had targeted his family had been completely dismantled, its leaders dead or imprisoned, and its victims rescued and provided with the support they needed to heal. Justice had been served not just for Emma, but for every child who had suffered at the hands of Branch's organization. But most importantly, Daniel had kept his promise to his daughter. The bad men could never hurt her again, and she was finally truly safe. Chapter 8: Justice Served. 6 months after the assault on Branch's network, Daniel stood in a federal courthouse watching as the final members of the conspiracy were sentenced. The trials had been comprehensive and thorough, with prosecutors building ironclad cases against everyone involved in the network's operations. Judge Fernandez received 25 years for corruption and conspiracy, his legal career permanently destroyed along with his freedom. The court found that his abuse of judicial authority had directly enabled the suffering of dozens of children. Captain Brent Michael faced court-martial proceedings followed by federal prosecution. His military career ended in disgrace, and his sentence of 30 years ensured he would never again have access to military families or classified information. The defense contractors who had funded Branch's operations faced both criminal prosecution and civil liability. Their government contracts were terminated, their companies faced bankruptcy from lawsuits, and their executives received sentences ranging from 15 to 20 years. But the most satisfying moment for Daniel came when Wayne Finley was sentenced. The man who had locked Emma in a kennel and forced her to eat dog food from a bowl received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge's words during sentencing captured the feelings of everyone who had worked to bring down the network. "Mr. Finley, you targeted the most vulnerable members of our society, children whose parents were serving overseas to protect our freedoms. Your actions represent a betrayal not just of these families, but of every principle our military personnel fight to defend." The court finds that no sentence short of life imprisonment would adequately reflect the severity of your crimes. Wayne's final look at Daniel before being led away in shackles was filled with impotent rage and defeat. The man who had once threatened Emma's life was now powerless to hurt anyone ever again. The civil proceedings that followed provided financial compensation for the victims and their families. But more importantly, they established legal precedents that would help prevent similar networks from operating in the future. Military family support systems were completely restructured, with new oversight mechanisms and transparency requirements. Detective Adrian Dodd, who had been promoted to head a new task force focused on crimes against military families, provided Daniel with the final statistics of their investigation's impact. 67 children rescued, 43 adults prosecuted, 15 corrupt officials removed from office, and 3 defense contractors stripped of government contracts, she reported. Your decision to take action saved lives and exposed corruption that could have continued for years. But the personal victories were even more meaningful than the legal ones. Damon Freeman's son had made remarkable progress in therapy and was slowly rebuilding his relationship with his father. The other rescued children were receiving comprehensive support services, and most were showing significant improvement. Emma's recovery had been particularly inspiring. With intensive therapy and the unwavering support of her father, she had not only healed from her trauma, but had become an advocate for other children in similar situations. "I want to help other kids who are scared," Emma told Dr. Blake during one of her sessions, "so they know that their daddies will come save them too." Dr. Blake's reports on Emma's progress have become a model for treating children who had survived systematic abuse. Emma's resilience and recovery provided hope for other families dealing with similar trauma. The psychological evaluations of all rescued children showed that while the abuse had caused significant trauma, the systematic nature of their rescue and the comprehensive support they received afterward had prevented long-term psychological damage in most cases. These children survived because people cared enough to fight for them, Dr. Blake observed. Your actions didn't just save Emma. They saved dozens of other children and prevented countless future victims. The broader impact of the investigation extended beyond the immediate victims. The reforms implemented in military family support systems, child protective services, and judicial oversight had strengthened protections for all military families. Colonel Burnett, who had been promoted following her handling of the crisis, established new protocols for protecting military dependents that became models for other branches of service. "What you accomplished went beyond rescuing your daughter," she told Daniel during his final debriefing. "You exposed a systematic threat to military families and national security that we didn't even know existed." The intelligence gathered from Branch's network had also provided valuable information about foreign intelligence operations targeting U.S. military personnel. Several foreign agents have been identified and expelled, and new counterintelligence protocols have been implemented to prevent similar compromises in the future. As Daniel reflected on the journey from discovering Emma's abuse to seeing justice served, he realized that his military training and experience had prepared him for more than just combat operations. The skills he had learned in Army intelligence, analytical thinking, systematic planning, and decisive action had been crucial to dismantling the network that threatened his family and others. But the most important lesson had been about the power of determined individuals working together to protect the innocent. Daniel's team had succeeded not just because of their military training, but because they had been motivated by love for their children and commitment to justice. The network that had seemed so powerful and untouchable had ultimately been vulnerable to people who refused to accept that children should suffer while adults looked the away. Branch's organization had depended on apathy, corruption, and fear to operate, but it had crumbled when confronted by people willing to risk everything to protect innocent victims. Emma's 7th birthday party, held in their backyard with friends from her new school and therapy group, represented the ultimate victory. Watching her laugh and play with other children, showing no signs of the trauma she had endured, Daniel felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "Daddy, look what I made for you," Emma said, running up to him with a drawing. It showed 2 stick figures, a tall one labeled Daddy and a smaller one labeled Emma, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Daniel said, kneeling down to hug her. "What does it show?" "It shows us being happy," Emma replied, "because the bad men are all gone, and you promised you'd never leave me again." Daniel looked at his daughter, healthy, happy, and safe, and knew that every risk he had taken, every decision he had made, and every consequence he had faced had been worth it. Emma was free. The people who had hurt her were imprisoned, and other children had been saved from similar fates. The promise he had made to Emma in that hospital room had been kept. The bad men could never hurt her again, and she would never have to be afraid. Justice had been served not just through the legal system, but through the actions of people who refused to let evil triumph over innocence. As the birthday party continued around them, Daniel held his daughter close and felt the peace that comes from knowing you have fought for something truly important and won. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 2 years after the destruction of Branch's network, Daniel stood at the podium of a military family support conference, addressing an audience of social workers, military personnel, and family advocates. His presentation on identifying and combating systematic threats to military families had become a cornerstone of new training programs across all branches of service. The key to preventing future networks like Branch's from developing is vigilance and communication, Daniel explained to the attentive audience. These predators rely on isolation and secrecy. When military families have strong support networks and clear reporting channels, it becomes much harder for criminals to operate. In the audience, Emma sat in the front row, now 9 years old and a confident, articulate advocate for child safety. She had requested to attend the conference because she wanted to understand how her experiences were helping other families. After his presentation, Daniel was approached by Colonel Burnett, who had news about a new development in military family services. "The Pentagon wants to offer you a position," she said. "Director of Military Family Security Services. You'd be responsible for implementing and overseeing the new protection protocols we've developed." Daniel considered the offer carefully. The position would allow him to continue the work he had started with Emma's rescue, ensuring that other military families received the protection and support they deserved. "I'm interested," he said, "but I have conditions. I want Dr. Blake as Deputy Director for Psychological Services, Detective Dodd as Head of Criminal Investigations, and Miguel as Director of Emergency Response. The team that exposed Branch's network should be the team that prevents future networks." "Done," Burnett replied without hesitation. "When can you start?" The new organization, officially called the Military Family Protection Service, became a model for other agencies responsible for protecting vulnerable populations. Using the lessons learned from dismantling Branch's network, they developed comprehensive protocols for identifying, investigating, and eliminating threats to military families. Emma's role in the organization was informal but significant. Her insights into how children experienced and responded to abuse helped develop new techniques for identifying victims and providing support. Her resilience and recovery also provided hope for other families dealing with similar trauma. "Emma has become one of our most valuable resources," Dr. Blake observed during a staff meeting. "Her ability to connect with other children who have experienced trauma is remarkable. She helps them understand that recovery is possible. The success of the Military Family Protection Service attracted attention from other agencies and organizations. Similar programs were established for police families, firefighter families, and other groups where parents' dangerous occupations made their families potential targets for criminals. Damon Freeman, who had accepted a position as Field Operations Coordinator, reported on the program's expanding impact during a quarterly review meeting. "We've identified and stopped 4 potential networks in their early stages," he reported. "The early warning systems we developed are working. We're catching these operations before they can establish themselves." Miguel's emergency response teams had successfully rescued 43 children from various forms of exploitation, providing them with immediate medical care and connecting them with long-term support services. "The difference between our approach and traditional law enforcement is that we're proactive rather than reactive," Miguel explained. "We don't wait for reports of abuse. We actively monitor for signs of developing threats." The program's success had also led to international cooperation. Military families stationed overseas faced unique vulnerabilities, and the protection protocols developed in the United States were being adapted for use in allied countries. But the most meaningful measure of success came from the families they had helped. Daniel's office was filled with letters, drawings, and photos from children and parents whose lives had been protected or saved by the organization's work. Emma had her own collection of correspondence from children who had been helped by the program. She maintained pen-pal relationships with dozens of young people, providing them with encouragement and support as they recovered from their experiences. "These kids just need to know that someone cares about them and believes they can get better," Emma explained to a reporter writing a story about the program's impact. "When bad things happen, it's easy to think nobody will help you. But there are always good people who will fight for you." Emma's wisdom and maturity, born from her traumatic experiences but nurtured by love and proper support, made her an effective advocate for child protection policies. She had testified before congressional committees, spoken at conferences, and participated in educational programs that reached thousands of military families. Daniel often marveled at his daughter's transformation from a traumatized victim into a confident advocate. The little girl who had once been locked in a kennel was now helping other children escape similar fates. The legal aftermath of Branch's network continued to provide benefits for victims and their families. A class-action lawsuit against the defense contractors who had funded the operation resulted in a $100 million settlement that provided ongoing support services for all victims. Wayne Finley died in prison 2 years into his sentence, killed by other inmates who learned about his crimes against children. Daniel felt no satisfaction from the news. Wayne's death didn't undo the harm he had caused, and revenge had never been the goal. Justice was Wayne facing consequences for his actions, Daniel explained to Emma when she asked about Wayne's death. What happened to him in prison was just more violence, and violence never really solves anything. But it stops bad people from hurting more kids, Emma observed with the practical wisdom of a child who had seen both cruelty and justice. Yes, but the best way to stop bad people is to catch them before they hurt anyone, and to help the people they've hurt recover and become strong again. Emma's recovery had indeed been complete. Her psychological evaluations showed no lasting trauma, and her academic and social development had returned to normal patterns. She excelled in school, had close friendships, and maintained the trusting relationship with her father that had sustained her through her darkest moments. Dr. Blake's longitudinal study of all the children rescued from Branch's network showed that early intervention and comprehensive support services could prevent long-term psychological damage, even in cases of severe abuse. Emma's case proves that children are remarkably resilient when they have proper support, Dr. Blake reported in her published research. Her recovery provided a roadmap for helping other children overcome similar trauma. The anniversary of Emma's rescue had become a celebration day for the Military Family Protection Service. Staff members and their families gathered to commemorate not just Emma's survival, but the birth of an organization that had protected hundreds of other children. During the third anniversary celebration, Daniel was presented with a special award by the Secretary of Defense for his contributions to military family safety. But the moment that meant the most to him came when Emma stood up to address the gathered crowd. 3 years ago, Bad people hurt me because they thought nobody would stop them, Emma said with the poise of someone much older. But my daddy and his friends proved them wrong. They showed that there are always good people who will fight for kids like me. She paused and looked directly at Daniel. I want to thank my daddy for keeping his promise. He said the bad men would never hurt me again, and they can't. But more than that, he made sure they can't hurt other kids either. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for Emma's courage. It was for everyone who had participated in transforming a personal tragedy into a force for protecting innocent children. As Daniel hugged his daughter after her speech, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had started as a father's desperate attempt to save his child had evolved into a systematic effort to protect all military families from similar threats. Emma was not just safe. She was thriving, helping others, and growing into exactly the kind of person he had hoped she would become. The promise he had made to her in that hospital room had been kept, but it had also grown into something larger. A promise to every military family that their children would be protected and their sacrifices honored. The bad men were gone, not just from Emma's life, but from the lives of countless other children. Justice had been served, systems had been reformed, and new protections had been established. Most importantly, love had triumphed over cruelty, and hope had overcome despair. Looking at his daughter, confident, happy, and dedicated to helping others, Daniel knew that their story had the only ending that truly mattered, the promise of a better future for all the children who would come after them.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.